There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today. I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your home for deer hunting news, stories, and strategies. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon, and this is episode number 264. And today on the show, we're diving into the story of my very first hunt for desert whitetails, also known as coues deer. All right, welcome to another episode of the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by Onyx. And we're here today. It's myself, we got my buddy Andy May, and we got Furter, and we're talking desert whitetails. I just got back from a Mexican coues deer hunt. A really cool hunt. I was out there with the MeatEater crew, and I thought a good way to do this would be to have a couple people interview me, rather than me just kind of tell a story. And Dan couldn't be here today, so I knew that Fertz and Andy could fill in well. And so, in a second here, I'm going to give them the keys, and we're going to turn it around on me, and we'll kind of walk through this whole hunt, what happened, what I learned from it, maybe a few things that might be able to help other people out there that want to try a coues deer hunt someday. And I guess for those who aren't familiar, coues deer are basically just white-tailed deer that live down in the desert southwest. So a really, really cool critter. But we'll get more into that later. Before we do that, though, I wanted to kind of shift gears a tiny bit here for just like 2 minutes. I had to make sure we cover this because, Furter, last time I was hanging out with you, you and Andy were together. You went on a doe hunt.
Yes.
On one of the properties that I usually hunt. The two of you guys went out there and had a pretty cool night. And since you're both here, I figured we should at least talk about that a little bit. You guys had a pretty good time, didn't you?
Man, that was a great time. That was a lot of fun that night. I don't know if Andy had any fun having to sit with me for a couple hours, but I don't know. I sure had a good time.
Yeah, it was a good time.
Yeah, so
Perfect night.
Josh, you came to this property that I hunt. You were going to come out and try to shoot a doe, and then Andy happened to be stopping by my place to pick some stuff up, and you were over at my house at the time before you were going to head out to hunt, and it just kind of worked out that, Andy, you were going to hunt somewhere else. I was like, well, why don't you just go hunt with Josh? And so you guys did. Do you want to walk us through that hunt, Josh and Andy?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, so I was actually out there the night before at the place you were hunting, and unfortunately missed one. Not sure what happened, but didn't come together for me. So I came back the next night, and just as I was about ready to go out and start getting around to head out and hunt, Andy showed up, and it just worked out perfect where we went out and sat together, and it was just, what was it, like the 27th or something like that, Andy? I don't know.
Yeah, I believe
End of December there in the late antlerless season, and I hadn't filled a tag yet all year, so I was feeling the pressure to put some meat in the freezer in the last couple days of the season, and luckily enough, it kind of all came together and worked out both of us to get a shot. We were talking leading up to, prime time, like, all right, what are we going to do? We're going to do a 1, 2, 3 shoot. Are we going to, am I going to shoot one and then you shoot one? So we kind of had it worked out where if it happened, I was going to take the first shot, and then, but if we could make it happen where we could do the 1, 2, 3 shoot, we'd give it a try. And, as soon as deer started piling out, that just went to, that all went out the window. It was just a little bit of chaos for a few minutes figuring out which one we were going to shoot and all that stuff. But
well, how did that go? I don't even remember hearing. I mean, I know you shot first, Josh, and I guess that's all I really know. I saw the little Instagram video you guys took, but how did that all turn out?
I got to remember back to this, how it all happened, and Andy may have to help me out. But if I recall, the first group that came out was like one mature doe and a couple of yearlings. I think one of them was a button buck, and there may have been two mature does that came out. And with how we were set up in the blind, Andy had a pretty good shot at them, but they were behind some brush and some limbs for me. So it was kind of just a waiting game for them to get, to clear those limbs for me. And finally they did, and we were trying to communicate back and forth of, all right, should we do the 1, 2, 3, and I just kind of blacked out. I think I don't really remember how that all went. I think Andy just said, just shoot one as soon as you get a shot, and pretty much what I did.
And then you dropped yours, and what was it? Maybe an hour later, Andy, that your doe came out.
Yeah. Josh put a great shot on his, and pretty much thought that was kind of the end, because there was actually. When Josh shot his, another big group of antlerless deer had entered the food plot. So there were several, and a few mature does. And I was going to let him shoot first, and then me try to get a quick second shot, a second shot off. But when he shot, they all kind of ran back into the cover, a big group of them. So I thought that caused enough commotion where, it was probably over for the night. But then, probably in that last 20 minutes of light or so, we see another, small group of antlerless come out, and they enter the food plot right there, much closer, and gave Josh the camera, and I was able to video him, and he was able to video me, and put a good shot on her, and she went a little ways, but pretty easy track job. So it was cool. It was a really, like, at least for me, a low stress kind of just fun hunt. We were giggling in there like a couple of kids, and just just having fun. Just enjoying each other's company, and it's kind of a nice change of pace sometimes when you're after a buck all the time. It's usually kind of like a solitary endeavor, but I really enjoy kind of partnering up once in a while like that, and sharing a hunt.
Yeah, me too. And that spot is particularly good for it.
Yeah, it may have been low stress for Andy, but I'll tell you what, it was pretty stressful for me sitting there. I was like, man, I'm sitting with Andy here. This dude just like gets it done every time, and I don't want to screw up. I can't do anything stupid like I usually do, and it's pretty low stress with marking the blind. I know I'm not the only one who will make a dumb mistake then, but when I'm with Andy, it's like I had to bring it up a notch, so I was a little nervous.
Yeah, man, it's like when I'm on this MeatEater hunt with Steve and those guys. That's exactly how I feel. Don't do anything stupid, Mark.
Yep.
So I was going to ask then, Furter, this is your first hunt with the machine, Andy May. Did you have a takeaway? Any like lesson learned or anything from this experience?
I mean, he is like a machine. I mean, it's just like moment of truth, man. Just gets it done, and there's no like wavering at all. Just went into that that mode, and man, when he had that shot opportunity, he made it count. So that's I always try to get into that like the autopilot, just muscle memory, just kind of when the time arises to be present and just kind of let everything take over and not get lost caught up in the moment. And that's probably my biggest takeaway. Just watching him kind of go through that, and what he does is pretty cool to watch.
Yeah. He's automatic. And Andy, this is probably your first time ever hunting with an icon in the hunting industry who just goes by a single name, just Furter.
Yeah.
Any takeaways from that?
Oh man, yeah, man. He was just I couldn't tell that he was feeling pressure. He seemed pretty laid back, and we were laughing and having fun, and I don't know, he just seemed like a really fun guy to hunt with. You'd have a lot of laughs, and the whole time leading up to the 2 kills, we were just having a good time. So I don't know, he's definitely someone that I would like to share a hunt with.
Yeah.
Doesn't take himself too serious, can laugh and have fun. And man, I tell you, when his doe came out and he had that shot, he sure looked like a machine to me. He put her down right in the plot.
Yep. Well, I've enjoyed hunting with both of you, so I figured you guys would get along just fine. So that was fun for me.
I'll take that, Andy. I'll take that as an invite to Nebraska next year with you two. Then
there you go.
Yeah. That was a heck of a trip, Josh. You would have enjoyed that.
Yeah.
All right. So speaking of heck of trips, though, we probably should focus on the main event here. I just got back from this coues deer hunt. It's quite a trip, but I wasn't sure what's the right way to kind of walk through the story. Should we talk just kind of strategy focused, what did I learn, what did I do, how did it go, or was just the story of the adventure most interesting? I don't know. I don't want to make these decisions, so I just thought I would take my host hat off and give you guys the host seat and controls. You guys are now the host of the Wired Hunt podcast. I'm your guest. I'm here to talk about hunting desert whitetails. Furter, maybe I'll let you kick things off if you want. Do you want me to just talk about something from the beginning, walk you through the story? Do you have any initial questions? What do you want to know?
Well, yeah, I guess I'd kind of like to know kind of what all led up to the hunt, and it just seems like quite the undertaking to plan that type of a trip. So I'd love to hear some of just from the start, kind of everything that went into it, the packing or the planning, what can you bring, what can't you bring, crossing the border, and kind of how did you prepare to be gone for, however long you were gone for on a trip like that?
Yeah, that's a great question, because that was a lot of the uncertainty. Well, there was a lot of uncertainty around the trip leading up to it, for sure. Just having never, I've never even hunted deer of any kind in the mountains like this. I've never mule deer hunted, never coues deer hunted, really almost never rifle hunted for deer at all, other than, when you and me take our rifles up to deer camp up north, but that's like a 40-yard shot max. Nothing long distance. I've never done any kind of long distance deer hunting like this. So there were a lot of different things coming into this one. As far as planning, though, the logistics of the trip, admittedly, this one was not too hard for me because it was with the guys from MeatEater. So it was planned by them to film for a TV show, basically. So Giannis and Seth and those guys handled most of the logistics. Yanni has got a buddy, Jay Scott, who Yanni used to be a guide for. And Jay sets up hunters down in Mexico with ranches to hunt on. So he helps organize the logistics of getting folks across the border and finding places that they can hunt, and then just kind of gives you access to this place, and then you go out and do your thing. So that was kind of our situation. I basically just needed to have all the gear I needed. I needed to be able to shoot, and just needed to be able to follow instructions as far as getting down to Arizona. And, we got down there, and I met up with Giannis and Steve and cameraman Chris, Rick, and Seth, and Ryan Callahan, and then a couple other guys. So we all met up there in Arizona. We all flew in from our various places, got our rental vehicles. When you got that many guys, I have to say, there's so much luggage, so many groceries. I don't know how much money we spent at the grocery store, but we had 3 vehicles just loaded down to the absolute brim. So we crossed the border with a lot of stuff.
You had sent that picture.
Yeah.
Just before you guys left, I was like, holy cow, man, that is some gear that they've got going across the border right there.
Yeah, man. And that kind of made me a little bit, I don't want to say nervous, but it was just a little bit unsettling because you kind of hear some horror stories a little bit about crossing the border, and there's just been a whole lot of stuff in the media lately about some rough stuff going on along the border in Mexico, and kind of drug cartel related violence and stuff like that. So that was a little bit of a shadow that hung over all of this. Giannis and the guys had all said, "Hey, we've done this trip a bunch of times. We've crossed the border many times. It's a pretty darn easy process. There's nothing to be worried about. It's very safe." So I felt pretty comfortable coming into it, but I'd be lying if I didn't admit that there's a little tiny part, there was a little voice in the back of my mind that was thinking, man, you're going to roll over the border in these pickup trucks with who knows how many dollars worth of camera equipment and 20 Yeti coolers sticking out the back and all this stuff. There was a lot of money rolling over the border there. If there was someone who, was into some shady dealings, we certainly would have been a good target. So there was just this small little bit of apprehension as we went into it, but it ended up being not bad at all. We went through the border. It was a long process, a whole bunch of different customs things. I don't know, we were probably there for several hours as they dealt with tourist visas and gun permits and vehicle permits, and a lot of paperwork. But again, Jay and Giannis really made that pretty easy. So a couple hours of custom stuff, and then we rolled through. And basically, we came into this little border town on the Mexico side. We drove through it for 5 minutes, and then it's like you're in the middle of nowhere. You went from this kind of admittedly kind of rough town into then this wide open, beautiful landscape. Just looks like southern Arizona or maybe some parts of southern Texas. Cactus and ocotillo plants and maybe some mesquite in places and desert grasses and these big rolling hills. And it was just gorgeous. And then made our way to the ranch. But I think, other than those things I just laid out, the other biggest piece of preparation for me, Josh, was when it came to shooting. Because as I mentioned, I just don't do very much long range shooting, mostly bow hunting. And then when I do pick up a firearm, it's usually a shotgun or a muzzleloader. I'm usually not shooting much past 100 yards. But these guys are saying, hey, we're probably gonna have to be taking shots at 300 yards. It's really hard to get close to these deer in this kind of terrain. And that's kind of something you need to be prepared for. So leading up to the trip, I shot my rifle quite a bit, but I was using, to make a long story short, I'd gotten very late notice about needing to get these guys information on what gun I was going to take. They needed to send in this paperwork, and they needed it today from me. They said, hey, we need to know the serial number of whatever rifle you're going to take on the trip. And this is a long time back, back in the spring or summer. And the only rifle I have is my grandpa's old deer gun. It's a 1980 Remington semi-automatic rifle. Probably never been shot past 100 yards, and that's all I had. So I was well, that's all I've got. Here's the serial number, and that's kind of what I was stuck taking. So I'm shooting that leading up to this trip, and when I go past 200 yards, it is all over the place. I sent you some pictures of the groups, Josh. I was like, man, I'm getting it in the kill zone, but past 200 yards, it was not something I felt really comfortable with. So when I was driving out that morning to the airport, in my head, I'm just thinking, man, I'm just not going to shoot past 200 yards. These guys are going to think I'm crazy. They're going to give me a hard time about it, but I'm just not going to do it. I'm going to keep it close. But as I'm driving, I kept thinking, well, maybe Giannis had mentioned to me he was going to bring a gun and hopefully hunt if everybody else filled their tags. So then I thought, well, maybe I could just use Giannis's gun, because I used Giannis's rifle on our caribou hunt last year. So well, maybe I should just use his, and that's dialed in and a good bolt action accurate gun. And long story short on that, I gave him a call and started chatting with him about the situation. He's like, yeah, man, just use mine. It's dialed in, it'll be great. And I'm so glad I did, because when we got there that first day, we all went out and checked the zeros on the rifles, and it was just a night and day difference. My groups went from being embarrassing past 200 yards to being dead nuts, inch and a half groups. So I felt good that I wasn't as horrible of a shot as I was thinking after shooting earlier. So I don't know. I think that's the biggest part as far as preparation was making sure I could shoot at those distances. I had all my basic hunting equipment that I would take like on an elk hunt. Same kind of clothes, same kind of temperatures. It was like a September elk hunt kind of weather. The one interesting or unique set of gear that I did bring that was different than maybe another Western hunt that I've done was just longer range glassing equipment. That was going to be, I was told, a huge part of what we're doing is just glassing hillsides at a very long range for a very long time. So I brought not just my regular 10x42 binos, but I also brought a pair of 18 power binos. I brought a spotting scope, and I brought a tripod for all of those. And that ended up being very, very important. So that's kind of what got us there. We all that stuff happened, got to the ranch. It's huge, huge property, untouched. I mean, really beautiful, other than cattle being ran there and cowboys working the ranch and stuff. But a very cool place. And when I got there and checked the zero on the rifle and got unpacked, it was kind of, here we go. All right, we need to take a quick break here to thank our partners at onX. They are the creators of the onX Hunt app. It is a very, very handy tool for whatever you might be doing during the hunting season. And right now, we are on the precipice, really, of shed hunting season. I usually like to get kicked off in mid-February, and I'm using onX a lot during shed season for a couple of reasons. Number one, if you're out there walking around with your onX Hunt app, you can see exactly where you are in relation to property borders. So if you know you can only hunt this one property, you're walking around looking for sheds, you want to make sure you know where those lines are. You can see private property lines on the onX Hunt app, and you can see public property lines. Very handy. Another thing I'm using the onX Hunt app during shed season for is getting property owner information, so that if I want to get permission on another piece, maybe I'm walking around somewhere and I see that, oh man, all the deer sign kind of looks like it's in that hillside next to that cornfield. I wish I could walk over there. Well, you can get that person's address, show up at their house, knock on their door, whatever it might be, try to get permission there. This is going to give you all the information you need. So, highly recommend it. Very handy for a lot of different situations. You can find the onX Hunt app on any mobile app store or by going to onxmaps.com.
Hey, Mark, I got a question. One of my favorite parts of like Steve's shows is that he sometimes like dives into like the history of a certain species. Did he do any of that in regards to the coues deer? Did he talk to you guys about that at all?
Yeah, that's a great point. A little bit. Probably the most interesting thing, or a couple of the interesting things, would be number one, articulating the fact that coues deer are in fact white-tailed deer. There's a lot of people that have questions like, is this a different species of deer? Is this the same thing? Why does it look so different? And yes, coues deer are white-tailed deer, but they're kind of a subspecies of white-tailed deer. And so basically they just have some morphological differences. Morphological differences being just some things with their appearance that have adapted over time to their surroundings. So they're much smaller body size compared to deer up by us. Like a buck down there could be like 80 pounds, 90 pounds, maybe something like that, body size. And then, of course, their antlers are smaller too. They are also much more adapted to living in mountainous environments. They're moving up and down. I wouldn't say like rocky, craggy peaks in this area, but they certainly weren't afraid of some elevation. And then I guess the one other interesting thing that Steve had talked about was this guy who had given the name coues deer to these guys, Elliot Coues. But if I'm going to get this story wrong, I think his name was Elliot Coues, and so that's why some people believe they're supposed to be called coues deer, because this biologist or whatever it was, I'm going to butcher this story, so just forgive me. I'm trying to remember this from like a late night podcast that we did with Steve. But I think his name was Elliot Coues, and that's how they originally got their name. And then over the years, hunters kept calling them coues, and so now there's this debate: are they coues deer or coues deer? Supposedly the proper pronunciation is cows, but everybody says coues. So that's why they are what they are. But probably one of the biggest things I took away from the whole trip was the fact that these are still whitetails. Like, they looked a lot different in some ways. The terrain was super different in a lot of ways. But but I saw a lot of things that were really similar. Like the rutting behavior, this is the rut down there. I mean, it was just like watching whitetails up by us, which was pretty cool to see bucks chasing does, to see bucks making scrapes, see bucks cruising down a ridge line, just like you might see in Iowa or here in Michigan or something. But I was seeing it, with cactus in the background. That kind of contrast of the familiar and the unknown was maybe one of my favorite things about the whole deal.
Did you get a sense of, like, I know it's probably tough because you hunted them for a short time, but did you get a sense if you thought they were, more weary than, your typical Midwest whitetail, less weary, or is it more related to like the terrain they live in? It's more open. They can see a long ways.
I think they are much more dependent on sight because of that kind of terrain. So definitely sight was the biggest thing. Like we were just worried about being seen. Hardly ever thought about wind direction at all. Now that was probably partly because we were just so far almost all the time. Even when you're sneaking in, you're at long distances still. But the guys there were talking about how they're so weary and how they are. There's a lot of predators coming after them. There's a lot of mountain lions, coyotes could definitely take down a deer this size. Supposedly there even had been jaguars in the general area too, which is pretty cool. Or a jaguar, I guess. So a lot of predators, but man, I still think that these deer they're not getting messed with by humans anywhere near as much as deer by us are. So no, I don't think they are nearly as on a string like our deer are up here. There's cowboys, riding around on horses, pushing cattle and stuff like that, but I just don't think it's like what we have here. So they seem to be in a very natural behavior. They seem to be just doing their thing, doing what deer do. Not nearly the level of I don't know, apprehension or just general paranoia that I feel like our deer have. But like you said, it's hard to say just having watched them for 7 or 8 days or whatever. But we got out there that first morning, and then for the next 7 days, all I did was watch these deer. I mean, literally every day, all day, we drove through the ranch to an area where we wanted to hunt. We hiked up to the top of a mountain or a big glassing peak or something. You sit down, you put a pad down on the ground, you pull out your tripod and your binoculars, and then you would just scour going left to right or up and down over and over and over and over and over again with your binoculars for like 10 hours, 11 hours, just staring through your binoculars. A lot of time watching these things. I guess it'd be more accurate to say I spent a lot of time watching hillsides, occasionally watching these things. Because that was probably another thing that stood out was just how hard it was to see these animals. You'd think with how open the country looked, you'd be seeing deer all over the place. But coues deer have been called the gray ghost. I'd heard they've been called, and I think they definitely lived up to that reputation. You'd be scouring a hillside. You would maybe watch it for 2 hours, and there hadn't been a single deer. And then all of a sudden, you go over one more time, and then boom, there's a deer right there, like out in the wide open. You can't believe you missed it 2 seconds ago, but here's this deer. And within 2 seconds, maybe you blink your eyes or you look over to the person next to you and say, hey, I got one. And then the next second, you look back, and the deer's gone. I mean, that happened to me so many times. That very first morning, we went up to the top of this mountain, did what I just said, set up, glassed, and that whole first day was basically what I just mentioned to you. We would spot a couple deer, we'd see them for a few seconds, a couple minutes maybe, and then they pass behind one bush, and then you never see them again. It was pretty bizarre. And that really was kind of how the first 2 days went. Just a big crew of us hiking out, glassing a lot, seeing a few deer, and then watching those same disappear. And we saw, not a huge number of deer, maybe 10 deer a day, a couple bucks in that group a day, spread out through the course of that 10 hours. But it was definitely, it required a lot of patience, like a different kind of patience than we have in a tree stand, I think. Because, when you're in a tree stand waiting for a whitetail to come through, like home, if they come, you feel pretty certain you're going to see something, and you feel pretty certain in most cases you're going to see something that's going to be kind of close, like you're going to get to really experience it. Here, you could search for 7 hours and not see anything, but if you did, it might be 1,500 yards away, and you're just watching like a little speck on the other side. So it was different for me. Like these guys had all done those kind of hunts. This is like a little different. I had like a mental shift to be able to like be in it in that kind of way. So that's something to keep in mind, Andy. I know you've wanted to do a coues deer hunt someday. That would be one thing I would recommend to like anyone who's going to try something like this, is just be prepared for a very different experience and go into it like realizing there has to be a tremendous amount of patience associated with this kind of hunt, and just willingness to sit behind the glass and search and search and search.
Yeah. How much time did you guys spend like let's say you guys set up, you find a high knob, a good glassing point, and you glass, and say you're there for an hour or 2 hours. Like, when did you guys have the inclination to move and change positions, or did you just stay patient and trust in the spot that you were in?
Yeah, that was one of the big questions I had coming into the whole thing too. And it seemed to vary by person. When we first got there, Jay, the guy that Giannis had worked with in the past, he, took us out to the property and drove up to one of the hillsides with us and kind of pointed out some different areas that he thought might be good. And his thoughts were, don't get tied to any one area for too much. Move around till you find some deer. But Ryan definitely was of the mind, like he found a spot and he found some deer, and then he kind of wanted to stick with it. And he has a ton of experience with, hunting mule deer and Sitka deer and blacktail deer and all sorts of stuff like that. So he definitely has like a system that works, and he kind of found an area that he felt confident there were deer. He'd seen some, and it was just a matter of just eventually seeing the right one. And that was kind of the trick, was that you could watch a hillside for hours and not see anything. But, the guys that had hunted here before in different places in Mexico always said, there's deer here. Like, they're there. You just can't see them. They're so small. They're so well hidden into these hillsides, these little juniper bushes and little trees and scrub oaks and stuff. All you need is the deer to like take 2 steps, and all of a sudden you realize they're there. So I think we're constantly dealing with that balancing act. Like, do we bounce around from place to place, or do we just sit here long enough and then wait till one steps out? For me, I found myself like wanting to move to different places just because I like needed the change of scenery. But Steve and Giannis and me kind of were on like a half a day kind of system in most cases. We usually kind of stuck it out in the same general region for 2-3 hours, and then maybe just move over one little knob or look at the other side of the ridge for the next couple hours. And then by the time the afternoon rolled around, if nothing had been going, then we would shift. But definitely as the trip progressed, as the week progressed, we started to kind of zero in. Like, we found a few zones where we started having some confidence that there were deer and there were going to be deer. And once we had that zone in mind, then we did stick around in some certain spots for a little bit longer. I don't know if we ever did figure out what the right answer was, but I think if anything, confidence has something to do with it. No different than when, any of us go out and hunt a spot during the rut or something. If you feel confident in why you're there and what's going on, it feels a whole lot better sitting there all day. You don't mind it. But if you're really uneasy about the decision you made, or you don't have that confidence, it's a whole lot harder. So that proved to be true here too.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I struggled with myself when I was hunting mule deer in Wyoming, just how long to give each glassing position. And I think I was probably like you, not quite as patient not quite as patient as I should have been, in a lot of instances. I kept wanting to, see the next canyon, and, I'm sure I missed some deer doing that.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. Like, you hear like Western guys talk about whitetail hunters sitting in tree stands. Like, oh, I don't know how you can do that. That's got to be so boring, sitting in a tree all day. I could never do it. And that's what you and me do all the time. But then when I go out west and I'm sitting on a hillside for a while, I get impatient, after a few hours. And I think it's probably just because I know I can move, like the possibility is there to move. While sitting in a tree, you just know you're locked there and you you're going to stick it out for however long you decided to. But for whatever reason, it definitely was different for me. I definitely had this wanderlust boiling up in me early on. And yeah, it's kind of funny. Those first 2 days, it was that kind of situation where sat most of the morning one spot, most of the evening another spot, glassed, saw a few deer. The third morning, though, we head up to another hillside, glass. I spot a pretty nice buck, thinking he might be a shooter. He goes over the hill. Decide we're not going to go because it's like, I don't know, a mile away. Keep glassing. Maybe an hour later, we spot some deer on this other ridge, not too far away now, I think 1,000 yards away, and glass up another nice buck. And I'm like, man, that's probably a shooter. And that was one of the hard things leading into this, was knowing how to determine like what's a shooter buck here in this area, because these deer are so much smaller than a lot of like mature whitetails would be elsewhere. But what was kind of easy for me was that a good coues deer buck is kind of the equivalent to like the buck in Michigan that 90% of guys would shoot.
Yeah.
So I just said, like, if somebody in Michigan would shoot that deer, it's probably a shooter here. So basically anything that was like 90 inches or bigger maybe was like, okay, that's probably one that we should chase. So we saw a deer kind of like that. I don't know, 90 inches, 100 inches, like just a nice solid 8-pointer. And that's when I got to enjoy that, or my wanderlust got to come out then, because we saw this deer, decided he's a shooter, and then that's when I got to actually stalk and move. So me and Giannis and Seth took off after this deer. So Giannis was running the main camera, Seth was running what they call the long lens camera, like a big zoom-in camera, and then I was hunting. Steve stayed up on the ridge to glass from his position, and if I got down to the bottom of this ridge and I looked back at him and the deer had moved somewhere, he was going to wave an orange bandana at me to kind of indicate where that deer went. And so I just kind of ran down this big hillside all the way down to the bottom. There was this little creek drainage, followed this creek drainage, and in the bottom of the valley, separating the ridge we were sitting on from the ridge where this buck was, there was this little knob. Kind of like a mini ridge that maybe went up 1/3 as high as the others, and it kind of was perfectly positioned to put ourselves within range of that deer. So to make this as fast as possible, snuck up to the top of this rise, didn't see anything. We thought maybe the deer had gone lower down the ridge. We'd seen this one tree with a white spot on it, and that was the last spot we saw this buck. And from our position, I could just see that white tree, but if the deer had gone any farther beneath it, we wouldn't have been in sight. So we belly crawled another like 70 yards. Well, we kind of stalked in on foot and then belly crawled to this final little lip. And then from that point, I could see this doe up there, watching the doe, and then I see a buck, glass at the buck, and I see like he's wide, but then he turns his head and he's kind of got shorter tines. And I'm thinking, man, is that the same one? I don't know, but it's got to be that same buck. There was no other bucks in there with that doe. He moves into another spot. He's in this like big shady brushy patch. I get my binos on him. I get my rangefinder on him. He's in shooting range. Giannis and Seth are all set up. They can film it. The buck's, there's a lane to this deer. He's at 230 yards, so he's like within the range I felt pretty comfortable with. It all kind of lined up perfect. But I was pretty excited at this point. Even though 230 yards is really long, it's a significant distance between me and the animal compared to most of the encounters, right? Like 20-yard encounters, 30-yard encounters when you're bow hunting. So you wouldn't think, or at least I wouldn't have thought leading into this, that would be like an intense moment. But it definitely still was. Like, it definitely was still a rush. It was definitely just had me amped. And I don't know if that was just, like it would be with any hunt, or maybe a little more pressure given like how different this was from anything I've done, or the fact there was a camera crew. I mean, all those things definitely ramped it up probably. But yeah, it was a situation that I didn't think I could pass up. So squeezed the trigger and the buck basically rolled. He ran like 5 yards and was dead. And that was very exciting. And then like 20 minutes later, Steve comes walking down the hillside. He walks up to me. He's like, "What happened, man? You shot the wrong buck." I'm like, "What?" "I shot the wrong buck." He's like, "Yeah, got my spotting scope on the buck. All of a sudden I hear a gunshot and another deer comes running into my view with blood coming out of his chest." Classic Kenyon.
Yep. Oh man. So that was day 3, you said, Mark? On day 3?
Yeah, it's day 3 of actually hunting. Kind of day 4 or 5 of the trip. But yeah, I mean, another buck had went in there, and it was a different, smaller buck than the original one we spotted. So it was kind of, I don't know. It wasn't too disappointing. It was kind of like a little bit bummed, especially because like 5 minutes later, another nice buck, possibly the same original nice buck, came walking back through, and I'm watching. I'm like, "Oh wow, that is a nice buck." But in the end, I was like, "Man, this is just too cool." Like, first coues deer, I can't complain at all. He was just kind of a nice little 6-pointer, beautiful little deer. We went walking up to it a little bit later, and I mean, beautiful coat on the, just this like gray and white mottled coat. But it looks like a whitetail. Otherwise, just really small. I could literally pick it up by all 4 legs and just lift it up and, throw it over my shoulder if I wanted. And you guys know I'm no Cameron Haynes, but I could have thrown this buck over my shoulder. So yeah, man, killed my first coues deer.
Awesome.
And I managed to kind of screw things up just enough to make it interesting. But it
wouldn't have been right if you didn't.
Yeah, that's for sure. I was just glad the shot was good. There was no fiasco with the shot or anything. I just wanted a good, clean, quick kill, no issues. Didn't want to embarrass myself. Didn't want to mess anything up with the deer or anything. And so that was, huge relief. I mean, I think you remember, Josh, I told you my story about last year in the caribou hunt, how that was nerve-wracking for me in that situation too, and I had to take 2 shots on that caribou, and that, bummed me out. And so this situation, it was a nice kind of, what's the word? Not retribution, but, oh gosh, I'm having a brain fart. Whatever it was, it felt good. So that's how my part of the hunt ended. Got my buck, quartered him out. You could literally fit all of the meat from the deer, all 4 quarters, back straps, tenderloins, roasts, scraps, everything, and the skull and antlers, everything into one backpack. Packed the whole thing out in myself, one load.
That's crazy.
Wow.
Any idea how much you think the live weight would have been on that?
I don't know.
Estimate?
80 pounds, 90 pounds.
Really?
Something like that. Not very big.
Wow. How difficult. So you hunting them with a rifle. Now say you went back with a bow. How difficult would it be to get one down with a bow?
Yeah. So that's the big question that I had coming out of this too. Because by the end of the trip, by the end of my part of the hunt, and then, I stuck around and still went out and hunted with Steve and Ryan as they were hunting, and I kind of just helped out with glassing. The one thing I kept craving the whole time was just closer encounters. Like I wanted to, to be able to hear the deer. I wanted to feel like the deer might be able to see me if I did something wrong. I wanted to, I kind of wanted that bow hunting experience again as far as being close. And even gun hunting in Michigan or somewhere in the Midwest, you still get deer close to you. We never had deer close to us, or at least not to me. I know Steve had a couple times, and Ryan did, where some deer were close, but I never saw a deer closer than probably just under 200 yards. So that was the one thing I missed, like that close engagement with the animal. So bow hunting, if I were going to go back and do it again, I would want to try bow hunting. I think it is possible if you had kind of low standards, at least for someone with my skill level and experience, in a good area. I think you go in there with a reasonable opportunity to shoot a deer, possibly. I think what you'd have to do is you would need to spend a bunch of time on the glass to identify a couple of these zones, kind of like where these little rut parties are. Like we ended up finding a spot where I killed my buck, and then one other spot where Steve and Giannis ended up killing their bucks, where there's this little pocket of rutting activity. Just like when you're hunting whitetails up by us, you'll sometimes find this little section of a property where there's a ton of rutting activity going on today and tomorrow or something, There'll be a hot doe in the area or a couple hot does in the area, and there's a bunch of deer activity. I think the way I would try doing it is I would glass and glass and glass from a distance until I found one of these little rut spots where there was a hot doe in the area. And then I would sneak in there with a bow and put myself in a position where I'd have some opportunities to move up and down a ridge. You know, like I could kind of hunker down the top of a ridge and watch. And if I saw some deer approaching, I could see where they're headed. Because there's definitely like bucks cruising just like they do by us. There was definitely bucks following does just like around us. And I think if you could see one of those deer heading your way from a distance, and maybe you were like in a little crevice on a ridge, or maybe you were, you know, near a little bend in the ridge or something where you could just get behind some cover and move into range of where that spot would be, I think you could have a chance. But it definitely wasn't, at least in what I was seeing, it wasn't like the archery mule hunt early season type things you see where you watch a mule deer feeding all day and then you watch where he beds and then you sneak into where he was bedded and shoot him out of his bed. We never, or at least I didn't see that kind of behavior. I didn't see a buck bed somewhere that you could actually see and then stalk in on him. I would kind of think I'd be trying to take advantage of a rut movement as I see it happening and sneak in. But man, it'd be a serious challenge. Like I said, the deer are hard to see. Big country, and it was a challenge for all of us just to get, you know, within rifle range. That didn't come easy. So trying to get within bow range, that would be, you'd have to go into it with a little bit of like a suffer complex. Like you want to suffer a little bit. You'd have to be willing to really go through some crap and probably not have it work out, but be okay with that. That's probably the mindset I would take if I was going to try, you know, hunting these deer in that kind of way.
Do they have a tendency to be, I think I've read before that they have a tendency to be pretty aggressive towards each other?
You know,
are they an aggressive species?
I don't know. I hadn't read one way or another if they're any more aggressive than any other whitetail. But I definitely saw aggressive rutting behavior. So on our fifth day, I think it was, we're coming into one of these zones of good activity that we noticed the night before, and we spot a couple nice bucks on this hillside, and turns out there's a hot doe, and the nicest buck is locked onto that hot doe. Steve and the crew go chasing after this buck. I stayed back on the spotting scope, just glassing it, just keeping an eye on the buck, and if somehow it ran off, they could come back to me and I could tell them, hey, I saw it go over the ridge or whatever. So while I'm watching this whole thing go down, that buck stayed with the doe, but it was either 4 or 5 other different, I think 4 different bucks. No, maybe 5 different bucks over the course of a couple hour period came in trying to make a move on that doe, and every time that big buck would like charge them, he'd run them off. I wouldn't be surprised if there was like some snort wheezing and stuff going on. It was that kind of behavior. So he would run after this buck, scare that buck off, and then run all the way right back to the doe, stand over the doe. And then another buck would come slinking up from the other side, and he'd charge that buck, run it 50 yards off, then come running back to his doe. And he did that for a long time. So definitely that kind of territorial rutting behavior that we see here too. You know, when they want to breed, they do not want anyone messing it up. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's some fighting. I'm sure there's some fighting. I didn't see it, but I gotta believe it happens.
I was just gonna ask you about these little rutting zones that you're talking about. Was there anything like specific, maybe like a different terrain feature or something that maybe caused that little area to be a hot zone of activity? Like, did any of these different areas have anything in common?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm not sure, but if I had to go off of like the couple things that stood out to me, most all of the best activity we saw was kind of in the upper third of all the ridges on the mountains. So most of the activity was kind of high up on the mountain, top third. And then always, again, this is just like whitetails anywhere else, near some of the best cover in the area. So if you had like a big, thick patch of junipers up on that upper slope, there's a good chance that was going to be one of those spots that might have some running activity. So where I found my buck was like the thickest strip of junipers, like 100-yard wide, swath of junipers that came along this ridge, and these deer were up on the upper slope chasing around and stuff. And eventually they moved down lower once that buck locked onto the doe. But it was a very similar habitat to where Steve ended up killing his. A lot of junipers on the side of this ridge, and then there's a tiny bench at the right about 2/3 of the way up the hill. And right on that bench is where the doe was bedded, and the buck was there, and then all these bucks are kind of cruising along the bottom of the cover right beneath them. So I think these deer operate a lot like whitetails by us do, in the fact that they, if possible, they like to be in cover or near cover, so they've got that safety close by. And then I definitely saw them, working ridge lines kind of similarly to whitetails by us when they're cruising, cruising 2/3 up the ridge. I don't know if they, are scent checking the same way. I kind of assume they'd be scent checking the same way, but I don't know enough about how these deer bed to tell you where these does are bedded, if there was a component of elevation or what. But it seems like they're doing similar things. So that's my guess.
Did you get a sense of, when they were on the side of the ridge, did it seem like they were on that leeward side, that downwind side more often, or were they sometimes even on the windward side?
That's funny you asked that, because at one point when I was out there, I asked myself the same question, and I realized that I had no idea, what the wind was doing. There was no cell phone service to ever check what the wind was doing throughout the day, and we just never thought about the wind enough to even stick your finger in the air and think about it. So I don't know. It was kind of weird in the way that really this was like a wind irrelevant hunt. And the wind probably was very shifty from one area to another. Like, we're watching deer 1,000 yards away. The thermals were probably doing something completely different there than they might have been doing, with the wind direction coming from our direction mixing with the thermals coming up. So I just don't know how that all worked. I wish I'd been thinking about it more at the time, but it just wasn't on our radar at all for whatever reason. So that was kind of unique, and I didn't think about it too much. Now that I'm here, I wish I had.
Did you? So I know you probably ate really well with that crew. What was the taste of the coues deer compared to a Midwest whitetail? Did you notice any differences?
That's a good question. I don't think so. I think that just tasted like a deer. The only stuff we ate from a coues deer, we made on our last day there. We made venison tamales. So we grounded up corn into a flour mix, added lard and water and baking soda, and made this, I don't know if you guys have heard tamales before, but make this kind of corn paste of sorts that gets wrapped up into a corn husk with this pulled venison that cooks in this chili Colorado spices. Really, really good, but some strong flavors in there. So it wasn't like, I could really differentiate. You could have put elk in there or deer or anything, and I probably would have told you it was great and couldn't tell the difference between any of it. But I guess I did pull some straight venison off the big chunk that we got cooked in water for 6 hours, and that just tasted like any other deer. But good. I mean, really good. Nice and tender and tasty. And let me tell you, venison tamales are very, very good. We did eat very well. We actually had there was a lady, I think, who maybe lived on the ranch that we were able to hire to help us with some of the cooking because we were out the entire day. But living in this, we stayed at this old ranch house on the farm, and so she made a couple dinners with us that were really, really great, like authentic recipes of her own. So she made chili Colorado, I think, one night, and made chorizo another night, and we had breakfast burritos with that, and we ate so many beans. I was in the bathroom 7 times a day. I ate so many beans over the trip, but it was really good. I mean, I ate Mexican breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 8 days. It was good.
She sounds like a much better camp manager than the last camp manager you had.
She definitely cooks better than you, Josh. But it was cool. All right, we need to take one more break here to thank our partners at Morton Buildings. And I'm excited about this one because I've, for a long time, looked at Morton Buildings out there on folks' properties and been very, very jealous. Morton, they're the builders of very high-quality steel pole barns and steel buildings. They can be used just as storage for your tractor and your hunting gear. I've seen others where they're, full-born pole barn houses where you have a large storage area for your truck and your tractor and your four-wheeler, but then also maybe half of it is a living area. Man, I've kind of dreamed of having my own little hunting property someday and a pole barn house on it. That is what I'm hoping to someday have, and it's kind of neat to be able to talk about on the podcast here and kind of tell you about my dreams. Maybe someday it'll happen, but from what I understand, Morton is the place to get this done. They have over 100 years of experience. They're fully customizable. Like I mentioned, you can have a pole barn house. You can have a huge storage facility, whatever you want. They have several different features that make these particularly high quality, like their Energy Performer insulation. They have high rib steel. It's very low maintenance, and right now, there are some special promotional prices going on that are running through February 28th. So if you are in the market for a new barn or pole barn house or a little living space on your property, you can head over to mortonbuildings.com to learn more. All right. So Andy had to bounce, but Josh, great food, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful country. I think a few things stood out to me, though, and feel free to hop in here if you've got some other questions. But looking back on it now, I thought it would be helpful to mention like a couple of the big takeaways for me, I guess, if I was going to do this again. I got to watch, my hunt go down. I got to see Steve's hunt go down. Ryan's buck, we kind of lucked into. We were just walking to another glassing knob and bumped this deer. And Ryan got a shot at him at just under 200 yards. And then Giannis's deer was kind of a little bit luck too, because that deer that Steve killed, after Steve's buck got shot, one of those other 4 bucks I was telling you about that was kind of trying to get his doe, he just stayed right there. He stayed right in the area. Steve went up and looked at his buck, checked it out, and that buck stayed within like 40 yards. Like just stood there stock still. And Giannis and Ryan were a couple hundred yards away watching all this happen, and they're just watching this buck standing next to Steve, not caring. And finally they said, well, if we can get Steve out of there, we could maybe get a shot. And so they ended up just yelling at Steve, told Steve, hey, Steve, move 200 yards down the other way. And that buck did not move. Steve walked 200 yards away. He was 40 yards from the buck. He walked the other way a long ways until he was far, far away. And then Giannis got a shot at that buck. I mean, just the craziest thing.
Crazy.
But that hunt and
That's
Kale's
wild.
hunt, him and Kale's hunt was kind of unorthodox. But I think, me and Steve's hunts, the way those kind of played out, kind of to what I've been talking all along about, just like a tremendous amount of patience behind the glass and the importance of how you glass. Probably the most important thing was having a tripod. I mean, I would never, ever hunt with a tripod for binoculars when you're whitetail hunting. But in this kind of situation where you're sitting on a mountain for 10 hours, when you're hand-holding them, you don't realize it, but at that distance, it's so hard to keep it steady. But when you're a tripod and you're looking for this little tiny thing in your view, it made like a world of difference. Like you could just see so much better. You could pan across the hillside so much more smoothly. It was the difference between seeing 0 deer and being able to see 10 deer a day.
Sure.
And then
it almost seems like an absolute necessity.
Yeah, I would say absolute must-have. And then the other nice thing is that, if you spotted a deer and you looked away, 9 times out of 10 you'd probably never be able to find it again. Like they're that hard to spot. He might not have moved at all, but you wouldn't be able to find him again. So what you would do is you would see this deer, and then you spot it, and then you're like, I got one, and then you can lock the tripod in place, the tripod head, so you lock your binoculars right at that view, so that so you don't need to refine the deer. It's locked onto where the deer is, and you can see it. Otherwise, I had a couple times where my hat knocked the binoculars and knocked it off, and could not find them again. So just crazy. We'd have times when like I would spot one or Steve would spot one, but nobody else has. And so then you have to try to walk the other people into that deer. So try to describe to them where the deer is so they can find it themselves. And that was a whole challenge of its own, trying to verbally convey where this tiny dot is on a hillside 1,500 yards away. That's another takeaway probably too, is like if you're there with friends and you are trying to do that, and it's very helpful if you can do that, because the more people you can have on the deer, the better chance it is that you're not going to lose them, especially if one of you is going to go stalking and try to hunt them. So like being able to simply and accurately describe the landmarks that you're seeing and then a direction from it. So it was like, okay, do you see that highest peak in front of us with the two rocky boulders on the very top? And then you wait for your partner and he says, yeah, I see that. Okay, now go to the 6 o'clock from that. So the peak is the center of the clock. Go to 6 o'clock from that. Keep going until you see the yellow strip of rocks that go across in a straight line. Okay, yeah, I see that. Okay, now go 3 o'clock from that line of rocks until you see the juniper tree that has 2 branches on the left and 5 branches on the right. Okay, I've got that. It was that kind. It was like that was how you had to get people to see these deer. Otherwise, it was just you couldn't point them and say, "Hey, they're right there." And then the same challenge applied to like when you tried to stalk in close to find them again. You know, and when I had to move in to try to get close to my deer to shoot it, same thing. Steve and I had seen the deer at a distance, but then when he had to try to close the distance to get a shot, it's so much harder to find them again when you're close, because the angles are different, or the deer might have moved 20 yards or 100 yards or whatever. So the biggest takeaway on that front I had was when you make your move, and this could probably apply to any kind of hunt like this, mule deer hunt or whatever, find like a very, very specific reference point as to where you last saw that deer. Like I had a reference point in my head when I took off, but it was a little bit too general. I said, okay, it's bottom third of this super wide strip of junipers. I remember seeing him enter that part of it. But Seth, the other guy with me, he had identified a specific tree with a white circle on it, and that was huge because then we knew exactly where on that lower third within that strip of junipers we had to look. That helped a lot. So man, that's another thing I would definitely keep in mind. I think it's just patience, glassing, having the right gear, being very detail oriented when it comes to planning your stalks into these deer and how you're going to spot them, and patience again. I think it was just it's different. I mean, it was really, really different. Very cool, but very different. And like I said, I did find myself wishing I could get closer to him. That's probably my only regret is that I didn't get to have like a close call with him. It was some kind of hunting though, man. Would you ever do a hunt like that?
Oh, for sure. I'd love to do something like that. It's just, following along with your Instagram story last couple of days, you kind of been putting some updates on it. I go, man, that just looks so awesome. Just so different, than what you're used to. And even hunting like whitetails, like we've done a little bit out west, it's just so much different even than that. And hunting the river bottoms and stuff like that, it's just a totally different world, it seems like.
Yeah. Well, I've definitely found over the years that, I love whitetails. I've got to hunt a bunch of different things now, and I still just keep coming back to whitetails. Like, for whatever reason, they're just the coolest. But I definitely have found a growing desire to experience different kind of whitetail hunts, Like, I love my Midwest tree stand thing, but it's been a lot of fun to go out west and hunt the river bottoms. And it was a ton of fun to go to Nebraska and hunt these sandhill type terrains. And, I'm wanting to go do like a northeast hunt here maybe this year and try to track one down. And, just trying these different places. I'm sure you experienced it this year when you went to North Dakota, right? Just that different kind of terrain, slightly different behavior, but still the whitetail we love. Like, I don't know. It's just a really cool way to engage with these critters, isn't it?
And it's just so crazy as you go to all these different places, how adaptive they are to the landscape that they're in or the terrain that they're in. Just, from Florida to Canada to Mexico to the Northeast to the West. It's just crazy how they can just adapt so well and thrive wherever they're at.
I might be biased, man, but I think they're the number one champions of the outdoor world. I think white-tailed deer have just they're so adaptable. They can survive anywhere. Like you said, they're all over this continent. So for that reason, I think whitetail hunters are the best too, right?
Yeah.
Sort of related to the fact that these deer are seen all over the place, though, that kind of was something I was thinking a lot about when it came to like the landscape we were hunting. And I mean, it was stunning down there. I mean, beautiful, beautiful sunsets, really interesting different types of plant life. Like I said, all sorts of different cactus plants and agave plants and century plants, like big palmy bushes, acatillo, which are like these long, I don't even know how to describe it. It looks like something almost like out of like a Dr. Seuss book. Like imagine just like big sticks coming out of a single bush at the bottom, but they stand like 8 feet tall, and they have huge like 2-inch long spines all over each stick. I mean, kind of like our pricker bushes here multiplied by 10.
Right.
But just stunning. Really, really cool. But almost every night, I'd be sitting on a hill looking at these just drop-dead gorgeous hills and sunsets and vistas. And I kept falling back in my mind to thinking about home in America and thinking about the fact that we have places like this too, literally just like that, or other beautiful landscapes like that. But they're open to all of us. Like, we have public lands like that are open and available for everybody to hunt, to camp, to fish, to do whatever. And there just are not many opportunities. From what I gather, there are not many opportunities like that down in Mexico. Like, not many people, from what I understand, hunt down there because it's really hard to have guns. It's really hard to find places to hunt. I just think that I personally, and probably a lot of other people, probably take what we have in America for granted. And this is a big time reminder for me, just how good we have it. Incredible lands, incredible, whether it be the rights to public lands, the right to bear arms. I mean, we've got a lot of things going for us that I'm very thankful for.
And probably the timing that you're down there right now too, with everything going on, probably just makes you realize that, even more. You know what I mean?
Definitely.
Just with all the stuff going on with the southern border right now, it makes you really appreciate, what you got, especially when you're right there in the moment at this point in time.
For sure. A lot of talk about the border, a lot of talk about people that want to be in America. And I think my overarching take-home message from this trip for me was just how thankful I am to be a hunter in the United States of America, with the places we have to hunt and the animals we have to hunt and the tools and the rights and the opportunities that we have and the management system we have in place. Man, there's just a lot of things going for us here that I suppose is just another reminder for us of the importance of trying to make sure we keep it that way, right? We got to try to keep our public lands public. Got to try to keep them, as wild and as intact as possible. Undisturbed, yeah. At the same time, we got to also fight for, our rights to hunt, our rights to have firearms. I mean, God, there's just a whole lot of stuff these days that makes you wonder, I don't know. There's a lot of folks coming for the things we want, and we just need to make sure that we stand up for those things that are important to us. And it's not easy. It's not convenient. It's not always comfortable, as my friend, as Randy Newberg always likes to talk about when it comes to public lands. I think he always says it's not easy, it's not comfortable, it's not convenient, but it's always worth it. And man, after that week in Mexico, that's something that's going to be top of mind for me. So that's my Mexico coues deer hunt, dude. That is what I took away from it.
It looked awesome. Congratulations. That was an awesome buck. It was really cool to see. What did you guys have? 4 guys end up tagging out?
5 guys, because the four of us killed, and then our the CEO of MeatEater Inc., Kevin, he killed one earlier in the trip but had to leave, so he wasn't in that photo.
Gotcha.
But we filled 5 tags out of 6 that we had.
Wow, that's great. That's what a cool trip. And I gotta ask, I feel like we'd be leaving this out if we didn't touch on it. What are these guys like in camp, man? You gotta. It didn't look like no Hotel Beachmont that we stayed. What's the vibe in camp with those guys? It looks like you were probably laughing the whole time.
Yeah, that's a good point to make. It's probably what most people are interested in. They don't care about if I shot a deer or anything. They're more like, what's it like to hang out in camp with Steve Ranella? It's fun. It's cool. I mean, very competitive, I'll say, is one thing. Like Steve, Ryan, Giannis, all these guys, like super competitive. So there's a lot of like one-upsmanship going on. Like I bet you I can beat you in a arm wrestle. And then we're doing arm wrestle competitions. Then it'll be like push-up competitions. Then it'll be how many pull-ups can you do. So knowing me, Josh, you knew I wasn't.
You clearly lost all of these.
Yep. Although I'll tell you,
not able to hang.
After my caribou hunt and then like hunting turkeys in the spring and deer in the fall, I kind of knew what I was getting myself into. So I've been working my way into it. Like there's this thing they call the Century Club. So every day you want to do 100 push-ups a day. And so it's kind of like a group thing. Like someone's like, all right, where are you at? And like someone's like, I'm at 40. All right, bust out 25 more. And then one person will get down and start doing push-ups. And then whoever, needs to get some more for the day, they all hop in. And so when they first started doing it this spring, in my head, I'm so shitty at push-ups. I'm like, oh, God, I can't hang with them. I'm not going to do it. Well, it's going to embarrass myself. I do so few push-ups. So this time around, I was like, no, I'm going to be in the Century Club. I can easily do that. So I just started doing a handful every day and worked my way to the point now where I can hang with them. So I felt good about doing that.
You're doing knee push-ups, though?
Yeah, is that not right, Josh?
I think it was Ben. I think it was watching like Ben O'Brien's Instagram story or something, and I think it was Steve said, I gotta show Kenny how to do push-ups or something like that. I gotta show him the right form.
Yeah,
dogging on you a little bit.
Yeah, and it's true. He said that my stance on my push-ups is too wide with my arms, so they forced me to pull my elbows and my hands in closer to do my push-ups. But I can't. I have to do my push-ups on like clenched fists because I don't know if you remember this back in high school, but I got like
a cyst in your wrist.
Cyst in my
wrist. My God, yeah.
Yeah, man. So I can't.
I remember?
So I had to do them with fists. So for whatever reason, I usually did them wider, but now I'm doing them tighter. Doing those. We had to do a push-up, or not push-up, but a pull-up, not pull-ups, arm wrestle competition on the last day, and I came in second.
Wow.
Sort of. I guess third technically, because Steve was kicking everyone's butt. Like Steve's got it pretty well handled on most of these things, and so he was whooping on the cameraman and everything, and I'm like, well, screw it, I'll try. And I at least like gave him a run for his money. Like he gave his big push down towards the end, and everyone's like, oh, here it goes, just like everybody else. And then I was kind of in my head, I'm like, no, I'm not going down without a fight. And I was able to hold him for a while. He at least made him think that this could be interesting. So I felt good about that. But then Beto, I don't know if you saw the video that Steve posted on Instagram. It's pretty funny. But Beto was one of the guys that helped us with the border crossing and everything and with logistics. So he was there on our last day, and so we pulled him in and he kicked Steve's butt. So that was pretty funny. But yeah, otherwise it's just like a lot of stories, a lot of laughing, a lot of giving each other shit. Just like any other hunting camp, except for this camp has got, 9 people in it, and everyone likes to talk. Everyone's good at talking. Everyone. So there's lots of like debates and arguments and stuff like that, which is fun. So.
Oh yeah, I'm sure it's hard to get in a word.
It can be, for sure. And if you get a word in, and it's a debate, you better be very well prepared to defend it, because you'll get jumped on if you don't. So
I'd probably just sit in the corner of that crew and just listen.
Yeah, you got to be prepared to be told you're wrong and try to fight that. But yeah, man, it's cool. All those guys. Both the folks who are on camera, like Steve and Cal and Yanni, or the guys behind the camera, like Chris and Rick and Seth. Just super funny, cool people. We had a good time. I will say, the only thing else I would add about it, the only downside to the whole trip, was just how long it was. It was a long trip. I was gone for 12 days from home, and that was tough, being away from Everett and Kylie. After our trip, we took this September. How long were you? Well, I was gone longer than you, but I think I was gone for 11 days for that whitetail hunt.
Yeah, I think I was gone 7.
Yeah.
7 or 8, something like that.
Yeah. And after that one, I kind of told myself, kind of made a plan in my head that I didn't want to do any trips that long anymore. I wanted to try to keep future trips like 7 days or less, just, so It's not quite as tough on Kylie. And it's just, it's just hard it's surprisingly difficult to be like back before I had kids. I was always thinking that it wouldn't be that big of a deal, but now I'm realizing that it is. And so in this case, it was a trip that I was just along for. I didn't have the ability to really control the scheduling, and 12 days definitely had me missing my family. So
yeah,
that was...
Well, and as Peter said, our group chat died without you being around to spark that. So
I know
your family and your group chat.
I guess I'm more important to some folks than I realized. Something's like shocking me. I can't believe Peter wouldn't have some kind of odd picture to share with the group or something to keep the group text going. The things that guy on his phone.
He could be very good at that. Yep. Oh man. Yeah, man. Welcome home. Congratulations. Looked like just an incredible trip, incredible hunt, and glad everything went well for you, getting across the border and getting home, and no horror stories, so that's always good, right?
Yes, no horror stories. I'm back. Glad to be back, and so, all right. Well, I think we should wrap it up, man. Thank you for hopping on here and playing host.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. And since I'm hosting, I feel like I should maybe get to do the sign off. Do I get to do the sign off?
Yeah, go ahead. Take it away.
Well, let's see how I can do that. You might have to hire me. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in this week. If you haven't done so already, please leave a comment and review on our iTunes. Helps everyone else see it. Leave 5 stars. And until next time, stay wired to hunt.
Very well played.
How did I do?
Yeah, that was pretty good.
I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. You ever get that feeling the walls closing in, the concrete jungle suffocating you? You crave some wide open spaces, the chance to connect with nature, maybe in a spot all your own. Well, head over to land.com. They've got ranches, forests, mountains, streams, you name it. Search by acreage. You can search by location. You can search by the kind of hunting and fishing you're dreaming of. Land.com. It is where the adventure begins.